Revenge strike, when humiliation turns into the moment that changes everything. My wife hissed. Stay in the back, don't embarrass me. 30 seconds later, the billionaire walked past her straight to me. I was standing behind a marble column when Eleanor Price took my hands. Not shook them, took them. Her fingers were warm, steady. She didn't look at my tux. She looked at my wrist, the pale scar that ran like a question mark from a job gone wrong 20 years earlier. Her eyes filled. The room kept humming jazz laughter, the soft clink of glasses. But for a second, it all went quiet. I've been looking for you for 28 years, she whispered. Somebody dropped a glass. I didn't have to turn to know who. That was the moment. The crack in the floor, the point of no return. Everything before that, every small humiliation, every swallowed word came rushing back, and everything after it would change my life. The gala was Marianne's night. She'd said it at least 3 times on the drive from Rockford, smoothing her dress, checking her lipstick in the mirror, like we were headed to a photo shoot instead of a fundraiser. The new owner was in town, she said. The donors would be watching. Optics mattered. Just stand back, she told me as we pulled into the valet line along the river. Let me handle introductions. I nodded. I always did. Inside the ballroom smelled like money polish and perfume, and something floral piped in through the vents. A trio played soft jazz near the windows. The river lights flickered through the glass like they were part of the decor. Marianne glided ahead of me, heels clicking shoulders back. She looked right at home. I did not. The tux was rented. The collar itched. My hands were the problem. She noticed them in the restroom, grabbed my wrist like she was checking a watch. God, Tom, she said, lowering her voice. They look rough. They're hands, I said. She rolled her eyes and pulled a small tube from her purse. Here, just cover the worst of it. I stared at the beige smear on my palm, the calluses, the scar, the spot where a live wire bit me in 03 when a breaker was mislabeled and the homeowner swore everything was off. These are from work, I said. And this is from success, she said, nodding toward the ballroom. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I washed the stuff off in the sink, watched it swirl away like it didn't matter, like I didn't. We re-entered the room, and she did what she always did, placed me behind her shoulder, a half step back close enough to fetch a drink, far enough to be unseen. Stay in the back, she hissed as a group of executives approached. Don't embarrass me. I stood by the column, watched the crowd, listened. Marianne laughed at jokes she'd heard before, talked about leadership and culture and ethics like they were personal inventions. People nodded, glasses clinked. Names floated by I didn't recognize. Then the music dipped and a ripple went through the room. Heads turned, phones disappeared. The owner had arrived. Eleanor Price moved like she didn't need permission. Mid-50s, simple black dress hair pulled back, no jewelry worth noticing, which meant it probably was. She shook hands as she walked, but her eyes were scanning. Looking, Marianne straightened, lifted her glass, and stepped forward with a smile I knew well. Eleanor didn't see her. She walked past the smile, past the toast, straight to me. I felt it before I saw it, like a change in air pressure. Her gaze locked onto mine and held. She closed the distance in 3 quiet steps and reached out, palms open. When she touched my hand, she paused. Her thumb brushed the scar, and then she said it. 28 years. Behind her, the room reacted, a sharp intake of breath, the thin chime of crystal on stone. Marianne's glass shattered near my feet. I looked at Eleanor and tried to speak, but my throat closed up. All I could manage was, I think you've got the wrong guy. She shook her head just once. No, she said, I don't. Moran pushed forward, then color draining from her face. Eleanor, Miss Price. This is my husband, Tom. He's a union electrician, Eleanor said softly without looking away from me. From Rockford. Marianne froze. I felt small and tall at the same time, seen in a way I hadn't been in years, in decades. The music picked back up awkwardly. Someone laughed too loud. A waiter knelt to sweep glass. Eleanor squeezed my hands once more. We'll talk, she said. Soon. Then she was Gone, absorbed by the crowd like she'd never stopped. Marianne stared at me like I'd set the building on fire. "What was that?" she demanded, voice tight. "What did you say to her?" "Nothing, I said. She said it to me." Her jaw worked. She bent to pick up her purse, then straightened, all composure again. "Go get another drink," she said, "and stay back." I did. But something had shifted. I could feel it in my chest, like a door that had been closed for years had cracked open. I watched Eleanor from across the room as Marianne took the stage, praising integrity and vision. I watched donors lean in. I watched people glance at me, curious now. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered if I'd been standing in the back because I belonged there or because I'd been told to. I didn't know why Eleanor had been looking for me. I didn't know what she knew. But I knew one thing. My life wasn't small anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Marianne lay beside me, stiff as a board, her back turned. The hotel room was quiet, except for the hum of traffic along Wacker Drive and the occasional siren bouncing off the river. I stared at the ceiling, replaying Eleanor's face over and over, how her eyes had gone straight to my hands, how sure she'd sounded when she said my name. 28 years. By morning, Marianne was already dressed. She stood at the window with her phone pressed to her ear, whispering sharp little sentences. When she noticed me watching, she turned her back. On the drive home to Rockford, she didn't bring it up. Neither did I. The silence sat between us like a third passenger. It broke 2 days later. I was at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, staring at the local paper when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Chicago area code. "Tom Keller?" a woman asked when I answered. "Yes, this is Eleanor Price." I closed my eyes. We met at a diner just off Alpine Road, the kind with vinyl booths and a bell on the door that still jingled when you walked in. Eleanor was already there, sitting with her back to the window, hands folded around a chip mug. No entourage, no assistant, just her. "You still drink black," she said as I slid into the booth. "I never stopped," I said. She smiled the smallest curve of her mouth, and for a second, I saw her younger in her hair, laughing in the bleachers with a cardboard tray of nachos balanced on her knees. "You remember?" I said. I remember everything she said. That's the problem. She told me she'd been back in town once years ago, drove past the old field on Boyland. The chain-link fence was rusted. The outfield grass was patchy. But she could still see me at the plate in 95 bottom of the 7th, 2 outs. The crack of the bat. The way the whole place stood up at once. "I told my roommate I was going to marry you," she said, like she was talking about the weather. I laughed, short and surprised. I couldn't even afford a car back then. "Clear as throat, you had something better," she said. "You were steady." The memory hit me hard. The smell of cut grass, the taste of dust, my dad's voice from the stands before he got sick. I told her why I left baseball, about the funeral, about the bills, about the job at the plant that turned into an apprenticeship, then a union card. "I wrote you," she said quietly. "After I moved, I called. I even asked around. I never got anything I said." She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "I know." I didn't ask how she knew. I was afraid of the answer. We talked for an hour. About Rockford changing, about work, about time. She didn't touch me, didn't flirt, just listened. When we stood to leave, she slid a card across the table. "If you ever need to understand paperwork," she said, "call this number. It's not about money, it's about clarity." That night, Marianne noticed the card. "Who's Eleanor Price?" she asked. Too casual. "Someone from my past," I said. She smiled without warmth. Funny how the past shows up right when the future's on the line. I didn't respond. I went to bed thinking about letters that never arrived and a life that might have been. And then I thought about my retirement account because for the first time I realized I couldn't remember the last statement I'd seen. I didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble came looking for me in the form of a missing envelope. Every quarter, like clockwork, there used to be a thick statement waiting in the mailbox when I got home from work. My 401k, the pension summary. Boring stuff, comforting stuff, proof that 35 years of early mornings and live wires were turning into something solid. That envelope hadn't shown up in a while. At first, I told myself everything was digital now. Marianne had said that more than once. Paperless is cleaner, Tom. But the thought wouldn't let go. It sat in the back of my mind while I tightened lugs and labeled panels, while I drank coffee at the break table, while I drove home past the old Union Hall on East State Street. That night, Marianne was on the phone when I walked in. "I know," she said, laughing softly. "He doesn't understand numbers. I'll handle it." She turned her back when she saw me. Something in my chest went cold. Later, after she'd gone upstairs, I opened the desk drawer where we kept tax returns and warranties. The folders were there, neat as always, but the blue binder retirement was gone. I checked the filing cabinet, the hall closet, the garage shelf where we kept old manuals. Nothing. "Mary," I called. She came down slow, careful. "What? Where's the retirement binder?" She frowned like I'd asked something silly. "Why do you need Hat? I just want to look at it." She waved a hand. "It's all online now. You don't need to worry about it." "I do," I said. "I've always looked at it." Her eyes hardened for a split second before she smoothed them over. "Tom, you're tired. You've been distracted since that gala. Let me handle this." That word again. Handle. I didn't push. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling the same way I had in Chicago, listening to the house creak around us. The next morning, I stopped by the credit union on my lunch break. The woman at the counter knew me. We'd gone to the same high school, she a year behind. She typed, frowned, then looked up. "Your mailing address was changed." "When?" "About 6 months ago." "To where?" She hesitated. "A P.O. box in town." My stomach dropped. "Who authorized that?" She glanced at the screen. "Your wife, power of attorney." I stared at her. "I never signed a power of attorney." She bit her lip. "It's on file, Tom." I drove back to the shop with my hands shaking on the wheel. Every red light felt longer than the last. That evening I asked Marianne to sit down. I went to the credit union. I said her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Why would you do that?" "They said you changed the mailing address and that you have power of attorney." She sighed like I was a child who'd interrupted her work. "It was just easier that way. You forget things. I don't forget my own name." "Don't be dramatic." I asked to see the paperwork. She brought a folder from the kitchen drawer and slid it across the table. It was thick tabs, signatures, dates. My name was on it. "See," she said gently. "You signed." I looked at the signature. It was mine, or close enough. I remembered the day she'd handed me a stack of forms after dinner, said they were updates for insurance and benefits. I'd signed where she pointed. "You said this was routine." I said it was. She said, "You're reading too much into it." I flipped pages. Beneficiary changes. Digital delivery. A spousal consent form I didn't remember discussing. My head started to pound. "Tom," she said, clears throat, lowering her voice. "You're getting confused. That happens." That word confused landed harder than anything else. I pushed the folder back. "I need time." She nodded, already standing. "Of course, just trust me." That night, I called the number on Eleanor's card. The forensic accountant she'd recommended met me at a diner near the old mall, a legal pad between us and a pot of burnt coffee on the table. He spoke plain, explained how accounts could be redirected, how paperless delivery worked, how easy it was to move things without raising alarms if one spouse controlled the flow of information. "You're not crazy," he said, "and you're not alone." On the drive home, I pulled into a grocery store lot and just sat there, hands on the wheel. I thought about the way Marianne had laughed on the phone about how she'd told people I didn't understand, numbers, about how small she'd made me feel for years. I could have exploded. I could have shouted, thrown the folder across the room, demanded answers. Instead, I did something my father had taught me after I'd fouled out of a game in anger back in '95. I slowed down. I wrote everything down, dates, words, changes, and for the first time, I didn't stand in the back. Marianne got smarter the moment she realized I'd gotten curious. It wasn't a full confession or a screaming match. It was subtler than that, like the way a good thief doesn't trip the alarm, just changes the code and smiles while you jiggle the handle. 2 days after I asked about the credit union, I came home and found the desk drawers reorganized. Not messy, worse, neat, empty of anything useful. The filing cabinet in the hallway had a new lock on it, the cheap silver kind you buy at Menards. "What's that?" I asked, pointing at it. Marianne didn't look up. From her laptop. "Privacy. It's my stuff, too." She clicked her mouse like she hadn't heard me. "Your stuff is in the garage." I went to the garage and opened the old plastic tote where we kept manuals and warranties. There were light bulbs, duct tape, a bag of Christmas ornaments, and a laminated church directory from 2012. No retirement binder that night. She sat on the couch flipping through a magazine like everything was normal. "Tom," she said without looking up, "I talked to HR, legal today." My stomach tightened. "About what?" "About you," she said, and finally met my eyes. "You've been acting strange since the gala." I let that sit for a second. The gall of it. The way she could twist reality until I was the problem. I asked where our retirement statements went. "Said." And I answered, she said, "Paperless, cleaner, less clutter." "I'm not clutter," I said. She set the magazine down carefully. "Do you want to keep your health coverage, Tom?" I blinked. "What are you talking about?" She gave me that HR smile, soft on the outside, iron underneath. "You've been working part-time lately. You've had those headaches. If you're going to start accusing me of things, it's going to create instability." "Instability," I repeated, tasting the word. "It's just reality," she said. "At our age, we can't afford mistakes. You don't understand how these benefits work." There it was again, that line she'd been using like a hammer. "You don't understand." I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell her I'd wired half the industrial park on the south end of town and never once didn't understand the difference between a hot and a neutral. But this wasn't electrical. This was personal. This was someone trying to make me doubt my own mind. So I did the one thing she didn't expect. I nodded. "Okay," I said quietly. "Show me." Her eyes narrowed. "Show you what?" "The accounts," I said. "Log in right now." She hesitated just long enough to tell me she wasn't used to being challenged. Then she picked up her laptop and turned it toward me, fingers flying across the keys. "You'll just get overwhelmed," she said. "I'll try," I said. She logged in fast like a practice CE magician. The screen flashed. Numbers appeared. She scrolled quickly, too quickly, then snapped the laptop shut. "See," she said. "Everything's fine." "That's not showing me," I said. "It is," she snapped, then softened her tone. "Tom, you're not thinking clearly." I stared at her, at the woman I'd defended at funerals and holidays and PTA meetings, the woman who used to lean her head on my shoulder at the drive-in back when we still laughed. "I'm thinking clearer than I have in years," I said. I walked upstairs and shut the bedroom door. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the effort of holding myself back. The next day after work, I went to the Rockford Public Library. That would have sounded funny to my younger self. Me, the guy, who'd rather rebuild an engine than reset a password, sitting at a public computer with bifocals perched on my nose like I'd suddenly turned into my father. But I did it. I pulled out my phone and called the forensic accountant again. "Okay," I said. "Talk to me like I'm 5. He chuckled. "That's half my job." He walked me through it slowly. Email recovery, security questions, two-factor authentication. I fumbled through the library keyboard like it was covered in grease. My fingers kept hitting the wrong keys. I muttered under my breath and got a look from a teenage librarian like I'd insulted her cat. After 40 minutes, I finally got into an old email. Marianne didn't know I still had access to one I'd used back when the Union app. Rent-a-ship program made us do online modules. And there it was. Notifications, account changes, address updates, a confirmation of beneficiary update that I'd never seen because it had been sent to the new paperless inbox. Marianne controlled. My throat went dry. I printed everything, one page at a time. The library printer squalled like it hated me, but it spit out proof. On the way out, I stopped at the diner on East State Street and met the attorney Eleanor had recommended. He was in his 60s, wore a plain suit, and talked like a guy who'd spent decades watching people lie under bright lights. You don't need to be loud, he told me, tapping the stack of papers. You just need to be precise. I'm not trying to ruin her, I said. He looked up. Then you're already ahead of her. That weekend, Marianne hosted a donor brunch at our house. She didn't ask me, she informed me. Just stay upstairs, she said, arranging flowers in a vase like she was auditioning for a magazine spread. We're discussing leadership initiatives. I almost laughed. Leadership in my own home. I had planned to avoid it to keep collecting proof quietly, but then I heard one of the donor wives in the entryway say, Marianne, your house is so curated. Curated like a museum, like I was a dusty exhibit in the back room. Something in me snapped, not into rage but into resolve. I came down the stairs, not in a tux this time, in my work boots, my worn jeans, a plain button-down shirt I'd ironed myself. Marianne's eyes went wide like I'd walked in naked. Tom, she hissed, teeth barely moving. What are you doing living here, I said. A couple of people turned. One of the donors, a gray-haired man in a blazer, looked at my boots and smiled like he approved. Those red wings? He asked. Yeah, I said. He nodded. Good boots? My dad wore those his whole life. Marianne's smile froze in place. For a second, I wasn't invisible. That night, after everyone left, Marianne cornered me in the kitchen. You embarrassed me, she said, voice shaking with anger. I leaned against the counter and looked at her calmly. You've been embarrassing me for years. Her face flashed red. You think you're clever now because some billionaire talked to you at a gala? I didn't answer that. I didn't give her anything she could twist. Instead, I went to the garage and opened a cardboard box I hadn't touched in a long time. Old baseball clippings, a faded team photo, and a cassette tape labeled in Eleanor's handwriting, Summer '95. I sat on the workbench and held it for a long time. Not because I wanted to run back to the past, because it reminded me that I used to be a man who stood in the batter's box and didn't flinch. The next morning I got a message from Eleanor. No hearts, no sweet talk, just a time and a place. A coffee shop near downtown Rockford. Quiet, neutral. When we met, she looked tired in a way money can't fix. I didn't grow up like this, she said, glancing around as if she still couldn't believe owned companies. Now, my first apartment had a leaky ceiling. I learned to keep receipts because nobody else was going to keep me safe. She slid a folder across the table. It wasn't cash. It was access copies of corporate policies, an outline of compliance procedures, the proper channels to submit evidence without getting crushed by Marianne's HR friends. Your story needs daylight, she said. Not drama, daylight. I swallowed hard. She's going to come after me. Eleanor nodded once. Then we do this right. I walked out with the folder tucked under my arm, feeling the weight of it like a tool belt. Marianne thought she'd locked the cabinet. She hadn't realized I'd learned how to read the wiring behind the wall, and when the invitation arrived a week later, Ethics and Leadership Awards dinner with Marianne's name in gold script, I held it in my hands and felt something almost like pity because she was building her whole life on image. And I was finally holding the paperwork that could bring it down quietly, legally, one domino at a time. The ballroom was louder this time, not with music with voices, overlapping confident voices. That belonged to people who thought they were safe. The Ethics and Leadership Awards dinner was held at a hotel near the river. All glass and brushed steel, the kind of place that made you feel important just by walking in. Clear as throat, Marianne had planned it down to the minute. She arrived early, clipboard in hand, heels clicking like a metronome. She hugged donors, laughed at inside jokes, kissed cheeks. Her name was printed on banners beside words like integrity, transparency, corporate values. I came in 10 minutes late, not because I was nervous, because timing matters. I wore a dark jacket and clean boots, not flashy, not defiant, just me. I nodded to the valet, thanked the hostess, and took a seat near the back, where Marianne always preferred me. From the stage, she looked radiant, confident, untouchable. When she started her speech, the room quieted. At a time when trust in institutions is fragile, she said into the microphone, "It's our responsibility as leaders to uphold ethical standards, even when it's uncomfortable. I felt a strange calm wash over me because I knew what was already moving. 3 days earlier, the packets had gone out through proper channels with timestamps and receipts. The audit committee outside counsel, the board liaison Eleanor had quietly introduced me to. Nothing leaked, nothing sensational, just facts, expense reimbursements that didn't align, conflict of interest disclosures that were incomplete, HR emails documenting pressure on spouses to sign routine documents, beneficiary changes made, without informed consent, paper cuts. From the corner of my eye, I saw a man in a gray suit whisper at the head table, and phones started coming out. "There are some questions," he said carefully, "that need to be addressed before we continue." Her eyes scanned the room, searching for help, for control. They found me instead. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just stood up. The sound traveled fabric against chair, the scrape of boots on carpet, heads turned. "Who is that?" someone whispered. Marianne's face went pale. "This is highly inappropriate," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "This is my husband. He's confused." There it was, that word again. I walked forward slowly, stopping a few feet from the stage. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, but my hands were steady, steadier than they'd been in years. "I'm not confused," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, I'm informed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The board member nodded once. "Mr. Keller has provided documentation," he said. "Substantial documentation." Marianne laughed a brittle sound. "This is a personal matter, a marital dispute." "No," the board member said, "it's a compliance issue." The projector behind her flickered to life. Email headers, dates, policy excerpts. Marianne turned eyes, darting lips, parting without sound. She reached for the lectern like it might hold her up. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "This is being taken out of context." I took one more step forward. "I've been in the back long enough to see everything, Marianne," I said. Silence fell hard. She looked at me then, not with anger, not even with fear, but with something close to disbelief, like she'd built her whole world on the assumption that I'd never stand up. Her hand shook. The glass of water on the lectern tipped, rolled, and shattered on the stage. Nobody moved to help. The board member thanked the attendees for their patience and announced a temporary suspension pending review. Donors avoided eye contact. A few looked at me with something like respect. Marianne was escorted off the stage, her heels clicking out of rhythm, for the first time I'd ever heard. I didn't follow. I stayed where I was until the room began to buzz again, this time with a different energy. Questions? Real ones. When I finally stepped outside, the night air felt cool and clean. I stood by the river and breathed. Eleanor joined me a moment later. She didn't touch me. "You did it," she said. "We did it right," I replied. She nodded. Inside, the dominoes were still falling, but out there under the city lights I felt something I hadn't felt since that summer in '95. Solid. I moved out the following week, not in a rush, not in the middle of the night. I packed what was mine, tools, clothes, a box of old photos, the cassette from '95, and left the rest exactly where it was. Let the house look curated without me. The lawyer handled the rest. Because of the paper trail, because everything had been done quietly and correctly, the divorce didn't turn into a circus. The beneficiary changes were reversed. The retirement accounts were corrected. The power of attorney was voided. It wasn't a jackpot. It was fairness. And after years of being told, I didn't understand numbers. Fairness felt like winning. Marianne lost her job before the investigation even finished. HR directors don't survive ethics violations, especially public ones. I heard through town because in Rockford, you always hear that she was exploring new opportunities. That was the phrase she liked to use on other people. I didn't gloat. I didn't call. I didn't go looking. Revenge, I learned, isn't loud when it's done right. It's final. The quiet days were harder. There were mornings I woke, up alone in a small apartment off Charles Street, and felt the weight of everything settle in my chest. 30 years is a long time to realize you've been shrinking yourself. Some nights I lay awake staring at a ceiling that wasn't mine, wondering how I'd missed it. But then there were other moments, like the first time I checked my accounts on my own and understood every line. Or the afternoon I stopped by the old field on Boyle and watched a high school game from the bleachers, the crack of the bat still sounding the same. Or the day I met Eleanor for coffee again. No gala, no speeches, just a quiet place near downtown with chipped mugs and bad pastries. We talked slowly, carefully about where we were now, not where we'd been. We didn't pretend we were 25 again. We didn't rush anything. At our age, you don't chase fireworks. You look for steady light. Sometimes we drove with the radio on low classic rock, slipping through the speakers of her old SUV. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. That was enough. I thought a lot about dignity in those weeks, about how easy it is to give it away one small compromise at a time, about how standing in the back becomes a habit if you're not careful. At 57, I wasn't starting over. I was taking myself back. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside, pause for a moment and sit with that feeling.